There's so much to say about the flying experience or the airline industry as a whole. It's a very underwhelming experience and sometimes can be frustrating or outrightly traumatizing. For such an expensive service or product, there's so much that can be better. And in this video, I'm going to share specific experience that I've had that I consider very unbearable and completely avoidable. Alright, the first thing is that shit happens. Like, we can't do without that. Like, things don't always go as planned, and that's very understandable. Things can come up sometimes that is completely out of the control of both the business and the customer, or leaves them with very limited options. It would be unreasonable to think that you can have a perfect experience, a seamlessly perfect experience every single time. Things always happen. That's life. But when things happen, the most important part of things happening is how you respond or how it is handled. And in this case, it's mostly how a business handles when things go out of their control. For instance, you have to cancel a flight. And there are many logistical reasons for why that might come up. That might even be for the safety of the customer. No matter how frustrating or frustrated the customer might feel, it might even be for their own safety. But how that is handled is more important than whatever pragmatic reason you might have made that decision, for instance. And that's what I call the moment of truth. In a customer experience, you can say anything in your communications, you can talk about how you care about customers and etc. But where it matters is when things go to shit. Like, what is the experience that the customer has? And how do you handle it? How do you make sure you make it right? And so when something like this happens, it's a time for the customer to know what they are worth to the business or what they value. In truth, outside of what they say they value. So recently, my flight was cancelled, and that terrible experience got me thinking about how things could be handled, if I owned an airline, or what is even the minimum. Like, looking at from the barest minimum, which is like quality service, to maybe something much more superior to that, which is like an enhanced experience, right? It just got me thinking about what that would look like. For one reason or the other, your flight was cancelled, and now how do you handle this situation with the customer? So level 1, which I consider the very barest minimum, you call the customer to inform them that their flight has been cancelled and you refund their money immediately. I consider that the barest minimum. I've had this experience several times when a flight is cancelled and all you get is an email. And for someone like myself that I'm not always looking through my emails, it's very easy to miss it. So it's already on you that you're cancelling the flight. How about you make sure that information gets to me? That's the barest minimum, level 1. Call me immediately, no questions asked, just refund my money. Now, if we go a notch higher, just a level higher, the level 2 of that would be that you give the customer an option to either get a refund or book a different available date. At this level 2, it's a win-win. It's a win-win because no business wants to lose a customer. And if a customer considers a new date as a viable option for them, that's not a bad thing. You've retained the customer, you still make your money, right? But it shouldn't be that you intentionally lock the customer in a position where they don't have the option to now explore the alternatives that there might be. So giving the customer an option is still reasonable. Like, okay, you can choose a different date or choose to get a refund, and so the customer doesn't feel stuck. That would be level 2. So what level 3 looks like, I would consider a very reasonable and customer-oriented business to a degree. And this will be, apart from calling to apologize, the most important thing, the outcome that the customer is seeking, is to be able to move from one place to the other at a given time. And if you care about the customer, what you should focus on in that situation is how to make sure that outcome is fulfilled. So what could an airline do in that case? You could decide that, okay, we are going to check for alternative flights from other airlines possibly, and then we are going to give you the options of either flying with us on another day, or taking all these available flights that still fit within the schedule that you originally applied for without any extra cost on the customer. I think that would be a very reasonable level, and it baffles me that this is not even a thing right now. You plan whatever reason you need to travel, you've made arrangements, and then you suddenly realize that your flight has been cancelled, and it's all on you. It's your liability to deal with. And I wonder, because even public transport in Lagos, like Danfo for instance, as rowdy and rough and uncultured as it can look like, I've had experiences where maybe a Danfo bus decide that they don't want to go as far as my destination. But as frustrating as that experience is, they will still put you in a new bus. In fact, they will not hand you your money except you insist that you take your money back. They will very likely hand you into a new vehicle, and they'll pay the bus owners or the conductor of that new vehicle. And it made me wonder that if a situation like that can be handled by Danfo drivers, if they can be that considerate in their rusty and crusty behavior, if they can still be that considerate and reasonable, why does that seem so far away for like an airline that is offering such an expensive and maybe sophisticated service? That would be the third level anyway. It would be that you make sure the customer gets on stock. You don't put the burden of that cancellation on them. You make sure that they can still make it to their destination, maybe through a different route, maybe a different airline, a different date. You essentially give them options, right? Without making them bear any significant cost on top of what they already paid for. Now, what would be the fourth level? The fourth level is what I call like proper reconciliation. And what that looks like is, whenever something like that happens, like a flight being cancelled, it's a liability on the end of the customer. And so reconciliation, this fourth level, is the business making sure that even though it comes at a cost to them, they are bearing part of that liability. So what I've experienced is that you cancel a flight, and then the customer is stuck, and then you're still trying to squeeze the most you can, the little you can from that situation. And because that's your priority, you completely leave the customer stuck. So here's the thing, many people might explain away and justify why this is not practical or it's very difficult to do, and there's so much logistics, it's very complex. And the truth is that no customer gives a shit about your complex operations. No customer gives a shit. All they want is that at the barest minimum they get what they have paid for. That's what they care about. So even if you cannot offer like the most superior, the most advanced or enhanced experience, make sure that people get what they have paid for, what they intend to do, or what they intend to achieve with whatever service or product they are buying from you. Make sure that you can make it right for them. And now, if you do a breakdown of what it actually costs someone to miss a flight, for instance, the first thing is the loss of time. Time is so costly. The value of time will vary from person to person depending on what they do with their time. So first of all, the loss of time can be even difficult to measure, because you don't know if I'm traveling because I have a deal to make. You don't know anything that missing of my flight might cost me. The next thing is increase in fare charge. So right now I have to use a different airline, and so the time frame is shorter, and then there are probably fewer seats left on all the airlines, so it means that I'm paying an even higher price. That's liability number 2. On another level is the cost of transport. Imagine that I've packed my bags, I've moved on to the airport with the mindset that okay, I'm paying maybe a taxi to the airport and then that would be it. But now I have to go back and come back again. So let's say I'm going to pay 10,000 naira to the airport normally. Now I have to pay 30,000 naira because I have to come back home and go back another day. By that situation, you have multiplied the cost. And I think this doesn't account for whatever else the customer might be losing. There might be other factors or other form of losses that might be difficult to account for. So missing a flight is a liability to a customer, and I think everyone can agree to that. But because we've established that it might be completely out of the control of the business, there is so much that the business can do to make sure that that liability is minimized as much as possible. At least a customer can actually feel considered. But the interesting thing is that a customer feeling considered, kind of solidifies this idea that at the end of the day, people will forget what you do and they'll forget what you say, but they will never forget how you make them feel. So even if in the process you are frustrated that you can't fly, if a customer feel considered, at the end of the day, it's still something that will register with that customer for a long time. And people can be very forgiving and tolerant of mistakes more than we even think. But the interesting thing in all of this is that you see Nigerian airlines, right? They see all these levels of how to handle such situation, and they chose to aim further down, lower than like what the standard should be. Because why you canceling my flight and you don't care that I'm on stock in that process, right? And so this leads me to like my very specific example. You see, I've had terrible experiences flying different airlines from Arik to ValueJet, but the one that has been most unbearable is Green Africa. I initially had a very fascinating experience because I'm very very big on design, and then there has been a lot of effort. You can see a lot of intentionality around how they coordinate themselves, how they look. I would argue that they have one of the most intuitive and delightful websites in Nigeria. At the end of the day, some things matter more than some other things. Like all of that beautiful website and deliberate act of trying to look professional and put together, falls apart the moment I realized that at the end of the day, you don't really care about your customer. So my first experience, I had booked a return flight, so I'd gone, and when I was about to return, they changed the date of the flight. They changed the time, not the date. The time of the flight was changed, and they only sent it as an email. And I missed that email. So the flight was supposed to be for 7 p.m., but they moved it to 2 p.m. So I was, in my confidence coming to the airport like around 5, only to see that their counter was closed. And I'm like, okay, so I can move the flight to the next day. Okay, fair. But now that has cost me extra in transport because I have to go back home and come back the next day. Unfortunately, I didn't make it early enough, which was my fault. But I came about 30 minutes to check in. And according to their policy, they said 30 minutes to check in is the close of, check-in. But they didn't allow me to check in for some reason. So I missed that flight because I had to fly to Lagos that day. So I paid another airline on the counter and it was very, very costly. Okay, I decided that, okay, this was my fault. No problem. I would use this ticket to fly some other time. So this other time I was meant to use this ticket to fly, the first thing they did was that they made me pay a fee for missing my flight, which is, you penalize me for missing my flight, which I understand. I mean, people should know that there's consequence for missing flight because you're not the only person on the flight. It's reasonable you're not the only person that needs to be considered. So it should not be incentivized. So I understand that. But I genuinely felt punished, especially for the fact that I missed this flight in the first place was their own poor handling of the situation. Then on top of that, they made me pay the difference. So for this new flight I'm meant to take, they made me pay the difference from the original flights that I booked. And it was annoying, but it was like, okay, I understand you're a business and okay, you have to run at no loss at least. Would you believe that on top of this, they cancelled my flight? They cancelled my flight with an email, a day to the flight, or maybe the day of the flight. Anyways, for me, I saw that email on the day of the flight. And again, I had to find an alternative and sort myself out. They only called me 3 days after to ask if I want to rebook my flight, which is so infuriating. But I said I wanted to get a refund. I promised I'll never use their airline again. And as we speak, this has been 3 months, and I'm still yet to recover these funds. Except maybe they sent the money and I didn't get the alert. But as I am standing right now or sitting right now, I have not received anything as a refund from all of these errors on their end. But I made another very big mistake. After I had sworn to myself that I would never fly Green Africa again, I was looking for a flight and I was looking for something very affordable. So Green Africa happened to be one of the most affordable flight that was available. And I was like, you know what? Everyone deserves a second chance, or sometimes people deserve a second chance. So let's just give it a shot. Maybe it was just a bad situation the last time. I went ahead, and this time it was not just me, it was two people on this flight, and they sent an email just earlier this week canceling that flight again. And this is very annoying because now I have to consider booking a new flight, which will cost more because I have to travel that day. And the lesson I can say I've learned from this is that don't be cheap, don't be cheap. But the frustrating thing, however, is that what really is the alternative? No matter the cost of what airline is available, they are almost all the same. The experience is almost all the same. There's nothing significant that you would appreciate paying more for, really. But the lesson for me is don't be cheap. So let's take it that way. But this feeling when someone does or says something to you and then you feel so weak that you don't even know how to respond. That's exactly how I felt. Like I felt very violated. Because this level of violation is so unacceptable if I were dealing with a person. But because organizations are organizations, they take advantage of this fact that customers only get to interact with representatives. So if you meet an employee, at the end of the day, an employee is also just there trying to make a living for themselves. They don't have control. They cannot, even if they care and they empathize with you, they are limited in their power to make a lot of things happen. So many organizations are comfortable with that level of immunity and they perpetrate all sort of wickedness. Let me put it that way. Dealing with many of these airlines, right? There's more than enough evidence that they violate any standard of fair trade. You penalize me for my own carelessness or my own omissions, but then I still get to bear the penalty for your own disappointment on top of the disappointment. And I don't think that makes any sense, because why are you causing me discomfort in trying to use your service, and at the same time I have to pay for that discomfort that you are causing me? That is just bullying. And I call it corporate bullying because that is exactly what it is. Because if you are dealing with a person, there would be a limit to what is going to be considered fair that you can do to someone who is trying to patronize your service or your business. The crazy thing is that this flight I booked for recently and was cancelled, I reached out to get a refund and they told me that it will take at least 14 days, that's 2 weeks, before I can get a refund. Now, mind you, flights are currently really expensive. So I definitely had to find more money than I had spent earlier on a different airline. Hopefully, they don't do the same thing. But imagine having to wait 14 days after you canceled a flight on me. That doesn't make any sense. You've left me stuck and even double stuck, because now I have to find that money. If I don't have that money or the alternative, I have to wait for 14 days. And when you ask, why are you waiting for 14 days? They come up with, that is our policy. And that is so unreasonable and wicked, because there's no way the owner of said company can face any customer and say it to their face with their full chest that our policy is 14 days before you get a refund, even though you couldn't get the service, without them receiving a very hot slap or a proper beating. They are successfully bullying the customer because they are an organization. And by the way, these people have a host of lawyers who deal with all these sort of cases every day. So it's not new to them. They've built some level of normalcy around people suing them. They know their way around the system, and of all systems, the Nigerian justice system that cannot be trusted. So the question is, what can a customer really do to get true reparation for this unbelievable act of wickedness? I really hope that I'm never unfortunate enough to be optionless to the point where I have to use Green Africa ever again. I really hope it never happens again. And I know people that have seen even worse experience or had even worse experience, and they have to mostly just stomach it. Because what really can you do, like as a customer or a common person, what can you do to get reparation for this terrible experience? So yeah, that's my rant for today. And I'm just wondering, is there anything that can be done really to make the airline experience better, even if it's by policy or by law? Like, why are customers allowed to be treated this way? Like, I don't think it makes sense. And I think before now, if you miss your flight, like that money is gone, sef. I think it's recently the I'm not sure about this anyway. I think it's recently they started like paying it forward where you miss your flight and you can take that flight another day or something. So I'm just wondering, like, how can this change? But in any case, because the average person can really not do anything when they experience this except for shouting at the counter if you have the energy for that, or threatening to punch somebody, or causing a ruckus. What airline, local airline, have you experienced and have promised yourself to never use again? Please share in the comments, like call their name and the exact experience. Let's know all of them, and maybe we'd even come together and start our own airline. Who knows? All right, thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next one. I have so many more people to call out, but for today, let's just stop here.